Welcome to Revenge Stories. They destroyed my prom night, laughed as my dress tore, filmed my humiliation for the whole school to see. 5 years later, they walked into my office for their dream job interview. I held their futures in my hands. They didn't recognize me at first, but I recognized them. Every cruel laugh, every mocking word, every moment they made me wish I could disappear. Now they needed something from me, and this time I held all the power. My name is Lyra Chen, and if you think this story ends with me getting even, you're only half right. Because what happened in that conference room 5 years after prom night wasn't just revenge. It was justice served with surgical precision. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Roosevelt High School in Springfield, Illinois wasn't the worst place to grow up, but it wasn't kind either. I was the quiet girl who sat in the back corner of every classroom, the one who ate lunch alone while reading thick novels that transported me anywhere but there. My clothes came from discount stores, my shoes were practical rather than fashionable, and my idea of fitting in was simply not standing out enough to become a target. But high school has a way of finding your vulnerabilities even when you try to hide them. Madison Hartwell was everything I wasn't. Blonde hair that caught sunlight like spun gold, a laugh that made teachers smile even when she was disrupting class, and a confidence that seemed to radiate from her very core. She lived in Maple Heights, the neighborhood where houses had circular driveways and 3-car garages, where college was assumed rather than hoped for. Her best friend Cassie Morrison was equally untouchable, with her perfectly straight auburn hair and a wardrobe that changed with every season's trends. They moved through the hallways like royalty, collecting followers and admiration with the same casual ease that others collected homework assignments. Then there was Derek Phillips, Madison's boyfriend and the star of the basketball team. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy charm that made teachers give him extra chances and made underclassmen step aside when he walked past. He had this way of smiling that made you feel like you were sharing a secret, even when you weren't. I learned their names not because we traveled in the same circles, but because their circles were so bright and loud that they cast shadows over everyone else. They were the sun, and the rest of us were just planets hoping to avoid getting burned. For 3.5 years, I managed exactly that. I perfected the art of invisibility, slipping through classes like a ghost, completing assignments, with quiet excellence, earning grades that pleased my parents but never drew unwanted attention from classmates. I had my small circle of friends, other quiet kids who understood the delicate balance of high school survival. Sarah Kim was my closest friend, a girl whose parents owned the small Korean restaurant downtown where we sometimes studied after school. She was planning to become a veterinarian and had already been accepted to 3 different colleges. Marcus Webb was our other constant companion, a lanky boy with thick glasses who could solve calculus problems faster than most people could read them, but who somehow always looked surprised when he got the highest score on every math test. We were the invisibles, the ones who would graduate quietly and disappear into colleges where we could finally become the people we were meant to be, far away from the social hierarchies that had defined our teenage years. But senior year changed. Senior year brought prom, and with it, the kind of pressure that even invisible people couldn't escape. My mother, Elena Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan when she was my age, carrying nothing but determination and a fierce belief that education could open any door. She worked double shifts at Memorial Hospital as a nurse, her hands always smelling faintly of antiseptic, her uniform always pristine despite the chaos of her days. She saved every extra dollar in a coffee can hidden behind the flower in our kitchen cabinet, money meant for my college expenses. But when prom season arrived and she saw the longing in my eyes as I watched other girls discuss their dress shopping plans, she quietly took $300 from that coffee can and placed it in my hands. "You deserve to feel beautiful," she said in her careful English, her voice carrying the weight of all her own missed opportunities. Just once, you deserve to shine. Those words carried more hope than I had ever allowed myself to feel. For the first time in 4 years, I let myself imagine being part of something bigger than my careful invisibility. I pictured myself in a beautiful dress, dancing under the gymnasium lights that had been transformed into something magical, creating one perfect memory before graduation scattered us all to different futures. I spent weeks researching, comparing prices, and reading reviews of discount formal wear websites. Finally, I found it. A deep navy blue dress with delicate silver beading along the bodice. Elegant but not flashy. Beautiful but not attention-seeking. It was everything I had ever dreamed of wearing, and it cost exactly what my mother had given me. When the dress arrived, I tried it on in the privacy of my bedroom, turning slowly in front of my mirror as the fabric moved like water around my legs. For the first time in my life, I looked in the mirror and saw someone who belonged at prom, someone who deserved to be there. Marcus asked me to go with him as friends, and Sarah decided to attend solo, making our little group of 3 into a prom night team. We made plans to take pictures in Sarah's backyard, where her mother had spent weeks cultivating a garden that bloomed in perfect timing for prom season. We would share a limousine with 2 other couples from our advanced placement classes, splitting the cost 8 ways to make it affordable. It wasn't the fairy tale prom that Madison and her friends would have, with their professional photographers and elaborate dinner reservations and designer dresses that cost more than my family spent on groceries in 3 months. But it was ours, and for the first time, that felt like enough. The week before prom, I could barely concentrate on my classes. I found myself daydreaming about the dance, imagining the moment when I would walk into the gymnasium and see it transformed. I pictured the lights dimmed to create atmosphere, the decorations chosen by the student council to match this year's theme of Midnight in Paris, and the DJ playing music that would make everyone forget about social hierarchies for just one night. I had my hair appointment scheduled for Saturday afternoon at a small salon downtown, where Mrs. Martinez, who cut my mother's hair, had promised to create an elegant updo that would complement my dress. I had purchased silver shoes that were comfortable enough to dance in, and Sarah had offered to let me borrow her grandmother's pearl earrings, small and classic, perfect for someone who didn't want to stand out too much. Everything was planned. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. I should have known that perfection was too fragile to survive contact with people like Madison Hartwell. The Thursday before prom, I was walking to my car after advanced chemistry when I heard my name called out across the parking lot. I turned, surprised, because very few people outside my small circle of friends ever acknowledged my existence. Madison was standing beside her cherry-red BMW, the car that had been her 16th birthday present, along with Cassie and Derek. They were all smiling, which should have been my first warning sign. Madison Hartwell had never smiled at me before. "Lyra, right?" she called out, as if she hadn't known my name for 4 years. "Can we talk to you for a second?" I approached cautiously, my backpack heavy with textbooks, my keys already in my hand, because some instinct told me I might need to make a quick escape. But their smiles seemed genuine, and for just a moment, I let myself wonder if maybe, finally, they were going to extend some small gesture of inclusion. "So, we heard you're going to prom," Cassie said, her voice carrying that particular tone that popular girls used when they were about to deliver news that they thought you should be grateful for. "Yes," I replied carefully, unsure where this conversation was heading. "That's so sweet," Madison said, and there was something in her voice that made my stomach tighten. "It's just, we were wondering, did anyone tell you about the dress code?" I blinked, confused. "The dress code?" Derek stepped forward, his basketball-honed confidence making him seem even taller than usual. "Yeah, there's this thing the prom committee decided. They want everyone to coordinate colors so the photos look better. Didn't you get the memo? I hadn't received any memo. I was on no committees, part of no groups that would have been privy to such information. But the way they were looking at me, with such apparent concern for my social well-being, made me want to believe them. What colors are we supposed to wear? I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. Well, that's the thing, Madison said, her smile growing wider. Your section is supposed to wear bright colors. Hot pink, electric blue, neon yellow. You know, really bold statement pieces. The photographer specifically requested it for the group shots. My heart sank. My beautiful navy dress with its subtle silver beading was anything but bright. It was elegant, understated, exactly the kind of dress that would allow me to blend in while still feeling beautiful. It was the opposite of a neon statement piece. But I already bought my dress, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Oh no, Cassie exclaimed, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. That's terrible. When did you buy it? 2 weeks ago. Can you return it? I shook my head. The website had a strict no-return policy on sale items, and the dress had been marked down significantly, which was the only reason I had been able to afford it. Well, Madison said, tilting her head as if she was thinking hard about my problem, I'm sure you can find something bright at the last minute. There are lots of discount stores that might have something. The word discount hit me like a slap. It was delivered so casually, so innocently, but it carried the weight of every social divide that separated us. They knew exactly where my dress had come from, exactly what my budget looked like, exactly how impossible it would be for me to simply buy a new dress 3 days before prom. I'll figure something out, I said, taking a step backward toward my car. Great, Derek said, his smile broad and encouraging. We just wanted to make sure you knew. It would be so embarrassing if you showed up in the wrong color and ruined all the photos. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. They walked away then, their laughter floating back toward me as they climbed into Madison's BMW and drove off, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot with the sudden, terrible understanding that I had been played. But I was 17 and naive, and some part of me still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, there really was a dress code, and they really had been trying to help me. So I spent that entire Thursday evening calling dress shops, checking websites, desperately searching for a bright-colored formal dress that I could somehow afford on 3 days' notice. Every phone call ended the same way. Nothing in my size, nothing in my price range, nothing available for weekend pickup. The few dresses I found online would take a week to ship, arriving long after prom night had passed into memory. I lay awake, that night staring at my navy dress hanging on my closet door, the silver beading catching the moonlight streaming through my window. It was still the most beautiful dress I had ever owned. It was still the dress that made me feel, for the first time in my life, like someone who deserved to be seen. And I made a decision that I thought was brave, but that I would later realize was the first step toward my humiliation. I decided to wear it anyway. Friday morning arrived with deceptive brightness. Spring sunshine streamed through the windows of Roosevelt High as I walked through hallways buzzing with prom excitement. Girls clustered around lockers comparing final preparations, while boys pretended not to care about the formal event they'd all spent weeks planning for. I carried my navy dress in a garment bag, planning to change at Sarah's house before our group photos. Despite the nagging worry about the supposed dress code, I had convinced myself that wearing something beautiful was worth the risk. Besides, Madison's story had begun to feel less credible in the harsh light of morning logic. You're overthinking this, Sarah had assured me during lunch. Since when does Roosevelt High coordinate prom colors? My sister graduated 3 years ago and she said everyone just wore whatever they wanted. Marcus agreed, adjusting his glasses as he spoke. It sounds like they were messing with you. Madison Hartwell has never cared about helping anyone but herself. Their confidence bolstered mine. These were my real friends. People who had known me for years and never asked me to be anyone other than exactly who I was. They wouldn't let me walk into disaster. But confidence is fragile, and high school has infinite ways to shatter it. The first crack came during 6th period English literature. Mrs. Patterson had arranged our desks in a circle for discussion about our final essays, and I found myself sitting directly across from Cassie Morrison. She was stunning as always, her auburn hair styled in loose waves, wearing a soft pink sweater that probably cost more than my entire prom outfit. Midway through our discussion of symbolism in The Great Gatsby, she leaned forward slightly and caught my eye. "Lyra," she whispered, just loud enough for the students nearest to us to hear. "I saw the cutest dress at Nordstrom yesterday. Bright yellow with sequins. It would have been perfect for you, but it was pretty expensive." The comment landed exactly as intended. Several classmates turned to look at me, curiosity flickering across their faces. Cassie's voice carried just the right note of innocent helpfulness, but her eyes held something else entirely. "Thanks," I managed, heat creeping up my neck. "I felt so bad when Madison told me about your situation," she continued, her voice dropping to an exaggerated whisper of concern. "Having to buy the wrong color and everything. It's really sweet how your mom sacrificed for you." The words hit like physical blows. My situation. Your mom sacrificed. Each phrase was calculated to expose exactly the vulnerabilities I had spent years protecting. Around us, I could feel classmates absorbing this information, filing it away for future reference. Mrs. Patterson called for attention, redirecting the class back to Fitzgerald's green light symbolism, but the damage was done. Cassie had managed to paint me as both pitiable and problematic in less than 30 seconds, all while maintaining the facade of friendship. After class, I escaped to the bathroom where I locked myself in a stall and tried to steady my breathing. This was just psychological warfare, I told myself. Tomorrow night, I would wear my beautiful dress and have a wonderful time with my real friends, and none of this would matter. But the attacks weren't finished. During 7th period study hall, my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Someone had tagged me in a photo. My stomach dropped as I opened the app and saw what Madison had posted. It was a screenshot of a group text conversation, with my name clearly visible at the top. The messages read, "OMG, did you guys hear about Lyra Chen? No. What happened? She bought this tragic dress for prom and now she's freaking out because she can't afford a new one. Wait, she's actually going to prom? LOL. Her mom spent their grocery money on a discount dress, and now Lyra's having a total breakdown about the dress code. Should we start a GoFundMe? Poor girl needs help." Below the screenshot, Madison had written, "When you try to help someone but they get all dramatic about it, some people just can't handle honest advice. Poor little rich girl, our prom drama." The hashtag made no sense. I was anything but rich, but that wasn't the point. The point was humiliation, and it was working perfectly. Within minutes, the post had dozens of likes and comments, each one driving the knife deeper. "Wait, she's the quiet Asian girl, right? Didn't know she even talked to people. Madison, you're so nice for trying to help her. Some people are just ungrateful. This is why I don't bother with charity cases." I screenshotted everything with shaking fingers, then immediately regretted it. What was I going to do with evidence of my own humiliation? Show it to my mother and break her heart? Present it to school administrators who would shrug and say social media wasn't their jurisdiction? The worst part was how expertly Madison had crafted the narrative. In her version, she was the helpful popular girl who had tried to save me from embarrassment, while I was the ungrateful charity case who had responded with dramatics. She had weaponized her own fake kindness against me. By the end of 7th period, the Instagram post had reached viral status within our school's ecosystem. Kids I had never spoken to were staring at me in hallways, whispering to their friends as I passed. The invisible girl had become suddenly, painfully visible, but for all the wrong reasons. I found Sarah and Marcus waiting by my locker, their faces grim with shared anger. "We saw it," Sarah said without preamble. "It's complete bullshit, and everyone with half a brain knows it." Marcus was angrier than I had ever seen him, his usual gentle demeanor replaced by righteous fury. "She made up that whole dress code thing just to mess with you. And now she's acting like she was doing you a favor. It's sociopathic. Their loyalty meant everything, but it couldn't undo the damage." Madison's post had accomplished exactly what she intended. It had marked me as someone desperate, someone whose mother sacrificed grocery money for her pathetic attempt at belonging. It had turned my beautiful dress into evidence of my family's financial struggles, my prom attendance into a source of entertainment. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. "Nothing," I said, because what else was there to do? "I'm going to prom tomorrow night. I'm going to have a good time, and I'm going to ignore them completely." But even as I said it, I knew ignoring them wouldn't be enough. They had tasted blood. And sharks never stop circling once they catch that scent. Saturday afternoon, I tried to lose myself in prom preparations. Mrs. Martinez worked magic with my hair, creating an elegant updo that made me feel sophisticated and grown up. Sarah's grandmother's pearl earrings added just the right touch of classic elegance. When I finally put on my navy dress, I caught my breath at my reflection. Despite everything, I looked beautiful. The dress fit perfectly, the color complemented my skin tone, and the silver beading caught the light in ways that made me feel like I was wearing starlight. For a few precious moments, I forgot about Instagram posts and fake dress codes and cruel hashtags. "You look stunning," my mother said from the doorway, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Like a princess in a fairy tale. If only she had known that the fairy tale was about to become a nightmare. The limousine arrived at 6:30, and I climbed in with Sarah, Marcus, and the other couples from our study group. Everyone looked incredible, and the excitement was infectious. We took selfies and laughed at Marcus's attempts to pin Sarah's boutonniere without stabbing himself, and for those 20 minutes in the limo, I felt like we were just normal teenagers heading to the most important dance of our high school careers. Roosevelt High's gymnasium had been transformed beyond recognition. The decorating committee had outdone themselves with the Midnight in Paris theme, hanging thousands of tiny lights from the ceiling to create the illusion of stars surrounding. The dance floor with artificial Eiffel Towers draped in elegant fabric, and setting up photo stations with romantic Parisian backdrops. The music was perfect, loud enough to feel in your chest, but not so overwhelming that you couldn't talk. Couples moved across the dance floor in everything from expensive designer gowns to modest dresses from department stores, and for the first time all week, I realized that absolutely no one was wearing matching colors. There had never been a dress code. Madison's lie had been even more calculated than I had realized. But vindication felt hollow when I spotted Madison, Cassie, and Derek holding court near the punch table. Madison wore a stunning emerald green gown that probably cost more than my family's car payment, her blonde hair styled in Hollywood glamour waves. Cassie looked equally magnificent in deep purple, while Derek was sharp in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. They were surrounded by their usual entourage, other popular kids who laughed at their jokes and competed for their attention. They looked like royalty holding court, and I was suddenly painfully aware of how naive I had been to think I could share the same space as them without consequences. "Ignore them," Sarah whispered, linking her arm through mine. "They're not worth your energy." She was right. I danced with Marcus, laughed with Sarah, and posed for photos with our little group. For almost 2 hours, I managed to forget about Madison's Instagram post and focus on creating the beautiful prom memories I had dreamed of. But Madison hadn't forgotten about me. I was returning from the bathroom when I heard my name being called over the DJ's microphone. The music stopped abruptly, and confused murmurs rippled through the crowd as everyone turned toward the stage. Madison stood there in her emerald gown, holding the microphone with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her right to command attention. The DJ looked confused but didn't interfere. Madison Hartwell was prom committee co-chair after all. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the gymnasium. "But I just wanted to make a quick announcement about something super important." My blood turned to ice as her eyes found mine across the dance floor. "So earlier, this week, Cassie, Derek, and I tried to help out a classmate who was having some trouble with her prom outfit. We told her about the color coordination thing because we thought it would help her fit in better." Confused whispers grew louder as 300 teenagers tried to understand what was happening. "But some people just can't accept help gracefully," Madison continued, her smile never wavering. "And that's okay. We all handle things differently. But what's not okay is when someone spreads lies about people who are just trying to be nice." The crowd was fully engaged now, sensing drama, but not yet understanding the target. I stood frozen. Near the bathroom entrance, too far from the exit to escape, too visible to hide. "Lyra Chen," Madison said, turning her brilliant smile in my direction. "Would you like to come up here and tell everyone what you've been saying about us online?" Every head in the gymnasium turned toward me. 300 pairs of eyes focused. On the girl in the navy dress with silver beading, the girl whose mother had sacrificed grocery money, the girl who couldn't take honest advice about fitting in. I hadn't said anything about them online. I hadn't posted anything, shared anything, or responded to anything. But Madison didn't need truth. She just needed an audience. "No?" she continued when I remained frozen in place. "Well, that's okay. Actions speak louder than words anyway." She nodded toward the back of the gymnasium, and Derek appeared carrying something that made my heart stop completely. It was a projection screen, the kind used for presentations in the auditorium. But instead of displaying academic content, it was showing a blown-up version of my Instagram profile, including several posts I had made over the past few months. Innocent posts about books I was reading, photos with Sarah and Marcus, pictures of my cat. But Madison had found the most vulnerable one, posted 3 weeks earlier after a particularly difficult day of college rejection letters. It was a simple text post that read, "Sometimes I wonder if I'm good enough for the life I want, or if I should just settle for what people expect from me." Out of context, displayed on a giant screen in front of my entire senior class, it looked pathetic, desperate, like the whining of someone who couldn't handle reality. "This is what Lyra posted after we tried to help her," Madison announced, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Because apparently, when you're trying to be somebody you're not, even kindness feels like an attack. The gymnasium was dead silent now, 300 teenagers absorbing this public humiliation with the fascinated horror of people watching a car crash. Some looked uncomfortable, but too many were smiling, enjoying the spectacle of someone else's destruction. "I just think we should all remember," Madison continued, "that prom is about celebrating who we really are, not pretending to be something we're not." She gestured toward me again, and this time her smile held no pretense of kindness. "So, Lyra, I hope you have a wonderful time tonight. And I hope you learned something important about accepting help from people who actually want what's best for you." She handed the microphone back to the DJ with the graceful confidence of someone who had just delivered a masterful performance. The music resumed, conversations slowly picked up, and the dance continued as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. In less than 5 minutes, Madison had destroyed not just my prom night, but my entire high school reputation. She had painted me as a liar, a fake, and an ungrateful recipient of charity, all while positioning herself as the magnanimous popular girl who had tried to help the pathetic outsider. I stood there in my beautiful navy dress, the silver beading catching the gymnasium lights just as I had dreamed it would, and realized that sometimes the cruelest thing about dreams is how beautiful they look right before they shatter. The worst part was still coming. The gymnasium felt like it was spinning around me. 300 faces blurred together in a kaleidoscope of judgment and pity, some openly staring, others pretending not to look while whispering behind their hands. The music pounded in my ears, but it sounded distorted, like I was hearing it from underwater. Sarah appeared at my side first, her face flushed with anger. "Lyra, we need to get you out of here." Marcus pushed through the crowd behind her, his jaw set in a way I'd never seen before. That was beyond cruel. That was calculated destruction. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like they had turned to stone, rooted to the spot where Madison had publicly eviscerated me. The silver beading on my dress suddenly felt heavy, like chainmail. Instead of starlight and the pearl earrings that had made me feel elegant, now seemed like ridiculous costume jewelry. "Everyone's staring," I whispered. "Let them stare," Sarah said fiercely. "They should be staring at Madison for what she just did, not at you for being her victim. But high school doesn't work that way. The victim always becomes the spectacle, while the perpetrator gets celebrated for their creativity." Already, I could see phones being pulled out, recording the aftermath, capturing my shock and humiliation for social media posterity. Derek had joined Madison near the punch table, both of them surrounded by their admirers who were undoubtedly praising the brilliance of her performance. She caught my eye across the gymnasium and raised her punch cup in a mock toast, her smile radiant with satisfaction. That's when something inside me shifted. The paralysis broke, replaced by a cold clarity I had never experienced before. I wasn't just humiliated, I was furious. Not the hot, explosive anger that makes you say things you regret, but the ice-cold rage that sharpens your mind like a blade. "I need to go home," I said to Sarah and Marcus, my voice steadier than I had any right to expect. "Of course," Sarah said immediately. "I'll call my mom to pick us up." "No." I turned to look at both of them, my best friends who had stood by me through everything. "You two stay. Don't let them ruin your prom night, too. I'll take the bus." "Absolutely." "Not," Marcus said. "We're not leaving you alone right now." "Yes, you are." I managed a small smile, the first genuine expression I'd felt since Madison grabbed that microphone. "Because I'm not running away in tears. I'm leaving with dignity, and I'm going to make sure everyone sees the difference." I walked across the gymnasium floor with my head high, my steps measured and deliberate. Conversations quieted as I passed, but I didn't hurry, didn't duck my head, didn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I retrieved my small purse from our table, said goodbye to the other couples in our group with perfect politeness, and walked toward the exit like I was leaving by choice rather than necessity. At the door, I turned back for one final look at the scene. Madison was holding court, gesturing animatedly as she no doubt recounted every detail of her triumph. Derek had his arm around her waist, playing the role of supportive boyfriend. Cassie was taking selfies with the group, already, crafting the social media posts that would immortalize this night. But I also saw other faces in the crowd. Kids who looked uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. Teachers who were frowning at the projection screen that Derek was finally taking down. Underclassmen who seemed confused about what they had just seen. Madison had won the battle, but she had also shown her true face to everyone in that gymnasium, and some of them, I realized, hadn't liked what they saw. The night air hit me like a slap of reality as I stepped outside Roosevelt High. The May evening was perfect for prom, warm, but not humid, with a light breeze that carried the scent of blooming flowers from the landscaping around the school entrance. Other students were still arriving, stepping out of limousines and cars in their formal wear, laughing and taking photos before heading inside to what they assumed would be a magical evening. I walked past them in my navy dress, the silver beading, catching the parking lot lights, looking for all the world like someone who had simply decided to leave early. Only I knew that my fairy tale had ended with public humiliation instead of happily ever after. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, and my silver shoes weren't designed for that kind of walk. By the time I reached the bench, my feet were aching and I had a small blister forming on my left heel. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional devastation that was beginning to set in now that I was alone. I sat on the cold metal bench and finally allowed myself to feel everything I had been suppressing. The embarrassment of having my private social media displayed for everyone to judge. The shame of being marked as someone whose mother sacrificed grocery money for her daughter's prom dress. The betrayal of being tricked into believing that Madison and her friends were trying to help me. But underneath all of that was something else, a growing understanding of just how calculated this entire evening had been. Madison hadn't just decided to humiliate me on a whim. This had been planned from the moment she approached me in the parking lot on Thursday. The fake dress code story had been designed to make me doubt myself and scramble for a solution. The Instagram post had been crafted to establish the narrative that I was ungrateful and dramatic. The public humiliation at prom had been the grand finale, designed to cement my social destruction in front of the entire senior class. She had played a long game, and she had played it masterfully. The bus arrived 20 minutes later, nearly empty except for an elderly woman and a man in work clothes heading home from a late shift. I climbed aboard, my formal dress completely out of place in the fluorescent lighting and worn seats, and paid my fare with quarters from my small purse. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of Roosevelt High in the window. The gymnasium was still glowing with warm light, music and laughter spilling out into the night. Inside, 300 of my classmates were creating memories that would last a lifetime, while I rode public transportation home in the ruins of my own prom dreams. But something had changed in me during that bus ride home. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, analytical assessment of what had happened and why. I pulled out my phone and began taking screenshots of every single social media post about the evening's events. Madison's original Instagram post, from Thursday. The comments and likes and shares. Everything that had been posted during and after her gymnasium performance. I wasn't documenting this for revenge, not yet. I was documenting it because I had learned something crucial about my enemies that night. They were so confident in their superiority, so certain of their untouchability, that they had created a detailed digital record of their own cruelty. Madison Hartwell thought she was invincible because she had never faced real consequences for her actions. Her parents were wealthy and influential. Her grades were good enough to keep her out of serious trouble, and her social status protected her from the kind of accountability that ordinary students faced. She had spent 4 years perfecting the art of destroying people while maintaining plausible deniability. But perfection requires consistency, and consistency creates patterns. And patterns, I was beginning to realize, could be studied, analyzed, and eventually exploited. My mother was waiting up when I got home, despite the fact that it was barely 9 o'clock and prom wasn't supposed to end until midnight. She took one look at my face and knew that something terrible had happened. "Mia," she said, using the Spanish endearment she only brought out when I was hurt or scared. "What did they do to you?" I told her everything: the fake dress code, the Instagram humiliation, the public shaming at prom. I showed her the screenshots I had collected, watched her face grow darker with each new revelation of cruelty. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, her nurse's hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. "These girls," she finally said, "they think they can destroy you because they have never known real struggle. They play games with other people's dignity because they have never had to fight for their own. I don't know what to do, Mom. Right now, you do nothing," she said firmly. "Right now, you heal. You finish school, you graduate, you start your real life, and you remember everything they did to you." Remember it for what? Her smile was small and sharp, carrying echoes of the young woman who had immigrated to America with nothing but determination and dreams. Because bullies like this, they never change. They just find new victims. And someday, when they have forgotten all about little Lyra Chen, you will be in a position to remind them that actions have consequences. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my prom dress hanging in my closet like the ghost of dreams that would never come true. But for the first time since Thursday, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I had learned. Madison, Cassie, and Derek thought they had destroyed me. They thought they had reduced me to a cautionary tale about knowing your place in the social hierarchy. They thought they had won completely and permanently. They had no idea that they had just created their own worst enemy. Sunday morning brought a flood of social media activity that I watched from the privacy of my bedroom. Photos from prom night filled Instagram and Snapchat, most of them showing smiling couples and group shots of friends having the time of their lives. But scattered among the normal prom memories were posts about the drama that had unfolded on the dance floor. Madison had posted a series of photos of herself looking radiant in her emerald dress, with captions about amazing memories with amazing people and so grateful for friends who keep it real. The comments were full of praise for how mature and classy she had been in handling a difficult situation. But I also found posts from students who had been uncomfortable with the evening's events. Jenny Rodriguez, a junior I barely knew, had written, "Prom is supposed to be about celebrating, not tearing people down. Some of y'all need to check your hearts." It has gotten dozens of likes and several supportive comments. Even more interesting were the private messages that started arriving in my inbox. Students I had never spoken to, reaching out to say they thought what happened was wrong. Underclassmen who had been in the gymnasium, warning me that videos of Madison's speech were circulating and offering to report them if I wanted. Most surprisingly, I received a message from Ashley Turner, one of Madison's peripheral friends who I had always assumed was just another mean girl in training. "Hey, Lyra," her message read. "I wanted you to know that what Madison did last night was completely out of line. A bunch of us tried to talk her out of it, but she said you needed to learn your place. That's not okay. I'm really sorry you had to go through that." I stared at that message for a long time. Madison had planned this humiliation so thoroughly that she had discussed it with her friends beforehand, and some of them had actually tried to stop her. But she had been so confident in her power, so certain that she could destroy me without consequences, that she had proceeded anyway. That confidence would be her downfall. I was sure of it. Monday morning at school was exactly as awful as I had expected. Whispered conversations stopped when I walked past, heads turned to track my movement through hallways, and I caught people taking photos of me with their phones. I had become Roosevelt High's latest spectacle, the girl whose public humiliation had been so complete that it was still providing entertainment days later. But I held my head high and went to every class, completed every assignment, participated in every discussion as if nothing had changed. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break, and I wouldn't give Madison the victory of driving me into hiding. During lunch, I sat with Sarah and Marcus at our usual table in the corner of the cafeteria. They were furious on my behalf, full of plans for revenge that ranged from reporting Madison to the administration to posting their own social media responses defending me. "We should expose her," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "Show everyone what she really is." "She already showed everyone what she really is," Marcus added. "We just need to make sure they remember it." But I found myself thinking about my mother's words from Saturday night. "Right now you heal. Right now you remember everything." "No," I said quietly. "We don't do anything right now." "What?" Sarah looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Lyra, she destroyed your reputation. She humiliated you in front of the entire school. She needs to face consequences." "She will," I said, my voice carrying a certainty that surprised even me. "But not now. Not while everyone expects it. Not while she's prepared for it." I looked across the cafeteria to where Madison sat with her usual entourage, laughing and posing for photos, completely comfortable in her assumption that she had won permanently. "Revenge is a dish best served cold," I continued, "and I'm going to make sure mine is absolutely freezing." Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read. They had never seen this side of me before. Calculating, patient, focused, on long-term strategy rather than immediate satisfaction. But they didn't know what I had realized during that long bus ride home on Saturday night. Madison Hartwell had made one crucial mistake in her campaign to destroy me. She had underestimated who she was dealing with. For 4 years, I had been the invisible girl, the one who studied quietly and avoided attention and never caused problems for anyone. But invisible doesn't mean absence. It doesn't mean unobservant. And it doesn't mean incapable. I had spent 4 years watching the social hierarchies of Roosevelt High, studying the patterns of power and influence, understanding exactly how the popular kids maintained their status and destroyed their enemies. Madison thought she was the master of the game, but she had never realized that some of us had been taking notes. The bell rang, ending lunch period, and students began clearing their trays and heading to afternoon classes. I gathered my books, slowly, watching Madison's table as they prepared to leave. She was still glowing with the satisfaction of her victory, still basking in the admiration of friends who praised her for handling the Lyra Chen situation so effectively. She had no idea that the Lyra Chen situation was just beginning. As I walked to my next class, I made a mental list of everything I would need for what was coming. Patience, first and foremost. The discipline to wait for exactly the right moment. The strategic thinking to plan several moves ahead. And the absolute certainty that justice, when it finally came, would be complete. Madison Hartwell had spent one night destroying my dreams. I was going to spend the next 5 years building the power to destroy her future. The game had changed, and this time, I was going to win. The remaining weeks of senior year passed in a strange twilight zone where I existed between two worlds. On the surface, I was still Lyra Chen, the quiet girl who had been publicly humiliated at prom and was now counting down days until graduation could rescue her from high school hell. But underneath, I was becoming someone entirely different, someone who spent her free time researching business schools, networking strategies, and the career trajectories of successful people who had transformed early setbacks into lifelong advantages. My grades, which had always been excellent, became absolutely stellar. I threw myself into my advanced placement exams with the intensity of someone who understood that academic achievement was the foundation of everything I was planning to build. While my classmates spent their final weeks of high school coasting, toward graduation, I was treating every assignment like a stepping stone toward my ultimate goal. Madison, Cassie, and Derek had moved on from the prom incident with the casual indifference of people who had never faced real consequences for their cruelty. They were focused on their own post-graduation plans. Madison and Cassie were both heading to Northwestern University, where their families had connections and their tuition was already paid in full. Derek had earned a partial basketball scholarship to Illinois State, though everyone knew his parents would cover whatever the scholarship didn't. They represented everything I had learned to recognize as fragile privilege, success that was inherited rather than earned, confidence that had never been tested by genuine adversity, and the assumption that their advantages would continue indefinitely because they always had before. I, on the other hand, was building something different, something permanent. The first major decision came during graduation week, when I had to choose between 2 college acceptances that would determine the trajectory of everything that followed. The University of Illinois had offered me a partial academic scholarship that would still require significant loans but would allow me to stay relatively close to home. Northwestern, the same university that Madison and Cassie would attend, had offered me a nearly full scholarship through their program for first-generation college students. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could attend the same prestigious university as my tormentors, essentially for free, because the very financial circumstances they had mocked made me eligible for assistance they would never qualify for. "Take Northwestern," my mother said without hesitation when I explained the choice. "You earned this opportunity. Don't let them make you run from what you deserve." "But Mom, they'll be there. Madison and Cassie. I'll have to see them constantly." She smiled that sharp smile I was learning to recognize as her most dangerous expression. Good. Let them see you thriving where they thought you didn't belong. Let them watch you succeed in their own territory. She was right, of course. Running away would validate everything they had said about me not knowing my place. But attending. Northwestern would prove that my place was wherever I chose to make it. I accepted the scholarship 3 days before graduation. At the ceremony, I sat with the other scholarship recipients in the front rows, wearing my navy blue cap and gown with the gold cords that marked academic distinction. When they called my name for the Outstanding Achievement in Mathematics Award, I walked across that stage with my head high, accepting applause from a gymnasium full of people who had witnessed my humiliation just weeks earlier. In the audience, I spotted my mother wiping away proud tears. At the other end of my row, I saw Madison rolling her eyes at something Cassie had whispered, both of them looking bored by the academic honors they would never receive. They had no idea that the quiet girl they had destroyed was about to invade, their world with advantages they couldn't buy and motivation they couldn't understand. Northwestern University was a revelation from the moment I set foot on campus. The Gothic Revival architecture, the sprawling lakefront setting, the palpable sense of ambition and achievement that seemed to radiate from every building. This was where I was meant to be. This was the launching pad for everything I was planning to build. My scholarship covered not just tuition, but room and board, books, and even a modest living allowance. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about money. I could focus entirely on academics, networking, and positioning myself for the opportunities that would matter most. Chose a double major in economics and psychology, the perfect combination for someone who wanted to understand both how systems worked and how people could be motivated to work within those systems. My professors quickly identified me as someone with exceptional potential, and I made sure to cultivate relationships with every single one who could contribute to my long-term goals. Madison and Cassie, meanwhile, were having the typical wealthy freshman experience. They joined the same sorority, attended the same parties, dated boys from prominent families, and treated their education like an expensive social club that would eventually hand them degrees in exchange for 4 years of networking and fun. I watched them from a distance, noting everything, learning their patterns, understanding their weaknesses. They lived in the most expensive dorms, spent money without thought, and surrounded themselves with other students who shared their assumption that success was something that happened to them rather than something they created. By Christmas break of freshman year, I had achieved a 4.0 GPA, secured a research position with Professor William Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, who specialized in behavioral economics, and been accepted into the university's prestigious honors program. I had also joined 3 professional organizations and attended every networking event the business school offered. Madison and Cassie had joined a sorority, attended numerous parties, and were both struggling with grades that would have been acceptable at most schools, but were disappointingly average at Northwestern. The contrast was becoming obvious to anyone who cared to notice. Spring semester brought my first real opportunity to begin the long-term positioning that would eventually lead to my revenge. Professor Chen recommended me for a summer internship at Hamilton & Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious management consulting firms. The internship was highly competitive. They typically only accepted students from Ivy League schools, or those with exceptional recommendations. But I had something most candidates didn't: a story that resonated with the firm's partners. First-generation college student, academic excellence despite financial hardship, the kind of determination that couldn't be bought or inherited. In my interview, I spoke passionately about wanting to help companies make better decisions by understanding both economic incentives and human psychology. I got the internship. That summer changed everything. Working at Hamilton & Associates wasn't just about learning business principles. It was about understanding power, how it was accumulated, how it was wielded, and most importantly, how people who thought they were untouchable could find themselves suddenly vulnerable when circumstances shifted. I learned to read financial statements the way I had once read novels, finding the stories hidden in the numbers. I mastered the art of professional networking, discovering that genuine competence and strategic thinking could open doors that family connections had traditionally guarded. Most crucially, I began to understand how corporate hierarchies worked, and how someone with the right skills could climb them faster than anyone expected. My supervisor, Jennifer Walsh, was a Northwestern alumna who had started at Hamilton directly after graduation and worked her way up to partner by age 35. She became my first real mentor, teaching me not just the technical skills I would need, but the strategic thinking that separated good employees from future executives. "The best revenge," she told me one afternoon as we reviewed client proposals, "is massive success. When people underestimate you, you use that underestimation as camouflage while you build something they can't ignore." I didn't tell her about Madison, Cassie, and Derek. I didn't need to. She had clearly faced her own battles with people who thought she didn't belong, and she recognized the same steel in me that had carried her to the top of her profession. By the end of that summer, I had received an offer to return the following year as a senior intern with increased responsibilities and significantly higher pay. More importantly, I had been invited to join the firm full-time after graduation, pending my continued academic excellence and successful completion of the advanced internship program. I was 20 years old, and I already had a guaranteed path to the kind of career that most people spent decades hoping to achieve. Sophomore year began with a confidence I had never possessed before. I moved into a nicer dorm room, funded by my summer earnings and academic scholarships. I enrolled in advanced courses that would prepare me for graduate school, even though I already had a job offer that made further education optional rather than necessary. I joined the Economics Honor Society and was elected to the Student Advisory Board for the School of Business. Madison and Cassie were struggling more noticeably now. Both had switched majors after poor performance in their initial course selections, and their social media posts had shifted from party photos to complaints about difficult professors and unfair grading. Derek, at Illinois State, was posting about basketball achievements but nothing academic, suggesting his focus remained exactly where it had been in high school. They had no idea I was even at Northwestern. In a university with over 20,000 students, our paths simply didn't cross. They remained in their bubble of privilege and social connections, while I moved in circles of academic achievement and professional development that they never entered. But I kept track of them. Social media made it easy to monitor their progress, their relationships, their plans. Madison was dating a boy from a wealthy family who was already planning to join his father's real estate business. Cassie had gotten engaged to her high school boyfriend, who was studying business at a state school with family connections that guaranteed him a management position at his uncle's company. They were all following the same predictable path, using family money and connections to slide into comfortable positions that required minimal effort and offered maximum security. They would never be hungry enough to excel, never desperate enough to innovate, never driven enough to build something that could survive without their inherited advantages. E, on the other hand, was building something unshakable. Junior year brought my first taste of real power. My work at Hamilton and Associates had impressed the partners enough that they created a special position for me, a year-round consulting role that allowed me to work part-time during school and full-time during breaks. I was earning more money as a college student than many full-time professionals, and I was being groomed for rapid advancement after graduation. More importantly, I was beginning to build my own network of contacts throughout Chicago's business community. Partners at Hamilton introduced me to clients who were impressed enough with my work to remember my name for future opportunities. I attended industry conferences where I was often the youngest person in the room, but where my insights on behavioral economics and consumer psychology earned respect from executives who had decades more experience. I was becoming someone who, mattered in circles where influence was measured and power was distributed, someone whose recommendations carried weight, whose opinions were sought, whose approval could make or break careers. The first time I used that influence was almost by accident. I was reviewing resumes for Hamilton's summer intern program when I came across an application from Derek Phillips. He had graduated from Illinois State with a degree in business administration and mediocre grades, and his resume was a masterpiece of exaggeration and empty achievements. His personal statement talked about leadership experience and academic excellence that bore no resemblance to the reality I remembered from high school. Jennifer Walsh had asked for my opinion on the applications, trusting my judgment after 3 years of exceptional performance. I could have simply noted that Derek's qualifications were weak compared to other candidates. I could have suggested that his background didn't align with Hamilton's standards for analytical thinking and academic rigor. Instead, I did something more subtle and more devastating. I prepared a detailed analysis of each candidate's potential fit with Hamilton's culture and client needs. Derek's evaluation was professional, thorough, and damning, without ever being explicitly negative. I noted that his academic record suggested someone who preferred structured environments with clear expectations rather than the ambiguous, rapidly changing challenges that consulting required. I pointed out that his extracurricular activities focused primarily on athletics rather than intellectual pursuits, suggesting different priorities than the analytical thinking Hamilton valued. I concluded that while Derek might thrive in a more traditional corporate environment with established hierarchies and predictable responsibilities, the innovative, fast-paced consulting world would likely not be the best fit for his skill set and career goals. Derek's application was rejected without ever making it to the interview stage. He never knew that his high school victim had destroyed his dream job opportunity with nothing more than a carefully worded evaluation that highlighted his weaknesses while maintaining perfect professional courtesy. It was my first taste of the revenge I had been planning for 3 years. And it was absolutely intoxicating. But Derek was just practice. Madison and Cassie were still out there, still coasting on their inherited advantages, still completely unaware that the girl they had destroyed was now in a position to return the favor. Senior year was when I would begin hunting them in earnest. By the time I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, I had accomplished everything I had dreamed of during those dark days after prom night. I was joining Hamilton and Associates as their youngest ever senior consultant, with a starting salary that was higher than what my mother earned after 20 years as a nurse. I had been accepted to Harvard Business School with a full fellowship, though I was deferring admission to gain more professional experience first. Most importantly, I had built a network of contacts throughout Chicago's business community who knew me as someone exceptional, someone whose judgment could be trusted and whose recommendations carried significant weight. I was no longer Lyra Chen, the quiet girl who got humiliated at prom. I was Lyra Chen, rising star of the consulting world, someone whose opinion could make or break careers throughout the region. Madison and Cassie had both graduated from Northwestern as well, though with significantly less distinction. Madison had barely managed a 3.0 GPA in communications, while Cassie had switched majors 3 times before settling on art history, with grades that were adequate but unimpressive. They were both entering the job market with degrees from a prestigious university, but without the academic achievements, professional experience, or network connections that would set them apart from thousands of other graduates competing for the same positions, and they were both looking for jobs in Chicago, the same city where I now held significant influence in the business community that would determine their professional futures. The stage was set for the final act of a revenge 5 years in the making. All I had to do was wait for them to walk into my territory, seeking the kind of opportunities that I was now in a position to control. I didn't have to wait long. My corner office at Hamilton and Associates overlooked Michigan Avenue, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Chicago's Magnificent Mile. At 23, I was the youngest senior consultant in the firm's history, and my desk was positioned perfectly to see everyone who entered the building's impressive marble lobby 32 floors below. It was from this vantage point that I began orchestrating the most sophisticated professional network Chicago's consulting world had ever seen. The key to real power, I had learned, wasn't just personal success, it was becoming indispensable to other people's success. Over the past 2 years, I had made myself essential to Hamilton's most important clients, not just through exceptional analytical work, but by understanding the human psychology behind every business decision. My specialty had evolved into something unique in the consulting world. I could predict how teams would perform, how leadership changes would affect company culture, and most importantly, how individual personalities would fit within existing organizational structures. Companies paid Hamilton enormous fees specifically to access my insights about human capital management. But my real achievement was the network I had built beyond Hamilton's walls. Every client presentation led to new contacts. Every successful project generated referrals to other companies. Every industry conference resulted in relationships with executives who remembered the young consultant who had provided insights their more experienced competitors had missed. I had cultivated relationships with hiring managers at dozens of Chicago's most prestigious companies, from traditional corporations to cutting-edge startups. More crucially, I had become someone these hiring managers consulted when they needed to make important decisions about candidates. My reputation for accurately assessing talent had grown to the point where a positive recommendation from Lyra Chen could accelerate someone's career, while a negative assessment could quietly derail it. I had spent 5 years transforming myself, from victim to gatekeeper. The first major test of my new position came when Jennifer Walsh approached me about expanding Hamilton's recruiting services. Several clients had asked if we could help them identify and vet high-potential candidates for key positions, given our success in assessing organizational dynamics. "We need someone to lead this initiative," Jennifer explained during our monthly mentorship lunch. "Someone who understands both the analytical side and the human psychology. Someone who can build relationships with hiring managers and earn their trust in our recommendations." "What would that look like?" I asked, though I was already envisioning the possibilities. "Initially, it would be a pilot program. You'd maintain your current consulting responsibilities but add talent acquisition as a specialty focus. If it's successful, we'd consider creating a new division with you as the lead." I accepted immediately, knowing that this role would give me direct influence over hiring decisions at some of Chicago's most important companies. Within 6 months, I had built relationships with human resources directors at over 50 major corporations, from investment banks to tech companies to healthcare organizations. My approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of just matching resume to job descriptions, I focused on understanding the cultural and psychological fit between candidates and organizations. I developed proprietary assessment methods that could predict not just whether someone could do a job, but whether they would thrive in that specific environment with those particular colleagues. Companies began requesting my services specifically, paying premium fees for insights that helped them make better hiring decisions and reduce turnover. I was invited to speak at HR conferences, quoted in industry publications, and consulted by executives who needed to make critical personnel decisions. But the real power came from the information I gathered in the process. Every conversation with a hiring manager taught me something about what companies valued and what they rejected. Every candidate assessment gave me insights into market trends and competitive landscapes. Every successful placement strengthened my relationships with both employers and employees who knew I had helped advance their careers. I was building a comprehensive map of Chicago's professional ecosystem, complete with detailed knowledge of which companies were growing, which leaders were struggling, and most importantly, which organizations would be receptive to my recommendations about specific candidates. The network grew exponentially as my placements succeeded in their new roles. Senior executives I had helped hire began consulting me about their own staffing needs. HR directors who had seen the quality of my candidate assessments started requesting my input on strategic workforce planning. Headhunters who had witnessed my success began partnering with me on difficult searches. Within 2 years of launching Hamilton's talent acquisition division, I had become one of the most connected and influential people in Chicago's hiring ecosystem. My calendar was packed with breakfast meetings, lunch consultations, and dinner networking events where I was no longer the youngest person in the room seeking opportunities, but someone whose presence other people sought. I had achieved something that money couldn't buy and connections couldn't inherit. I had made myself genuinely indispensable to an entire industry. But success in business was only part of what I was building. The other part was more personal and potentially more powerful. During my rise through Chicago's professional world, I had encountered dozens of people who shared similar stories to mine. Individuals who had been underestimated, dismissed, or actively sabotaged by people who thought privilege was permanent. Some had been passed over for promotions because of their backgrounds. Others had been excluded from opportunities because they didn't fit traditional networking molds. Many had experienced various forms of discrimination or dismissal that had motivated them to succeed beyond anyone's expectations. These individuals became my closest professional allies, bound together not just by mutual benefit, but by shared understanding of what it meant to earn everything you achieved. We formed an informal network within the broader Chicago business community, people who had proven themselves through merit rather than inheritance, who understood the value of lifting others who demonstrated genuine potential. This network became extraordinarily powerful because its members were distributed throughout different industries and organizations, all sharing information and creating opportunities for each other. When someone in our circle needed to fill a position, they consulted the network first. When any of us encountered exceptional talent that didn't fit traditional molds, we shared those connections with others who might recognize their potential. We called ourselves the meritocracy, though never officially. We were simply a group of successful professionals who happened to believe that talent and work ethic should matter more than family connections or social status. And every member of the meritocracy knew my story about prom night, though I had never told it to any of them directly. Word travels in tight-knit networks, especially when the story involves someone rising from public humiliation to professional prominence in less than 5 years. My transformation had become legendary within our circle, a proof of concept that the American dream of success through determination was still possible for those willing to pursue it strategically. The meritocracy gave me something beyond individual success. It gave me an army of allies who shared my values and my commitment to ensuring that merit triumphed over privilege whenever possible. By my 3rd year at Hamilton, I was managing a team of 12 consultants, overseeing talent acquisition for some of Chicago's most important companies, and earning more money than I had ever imagined possible. My mother had been able to quit her 2nd job at the hospital, finally working just 1 shift instead of the doubles that had supported us through my childhood and college years. But more importantly, I had positioned myself at the center of a web of influence that extended throughout Chicago's business community. There wasn't a major hiring decision in the city that happened without someone in my network being aware of it. There wasn't a significant career opportunity that arose without my opinion being sought or my recommendation being considered. I had become the person that other successful people turned to when they needed to make important decisions about talent. Which meant that when Madison Hartwell and Cassie Morrison finally graduated from Northwestern and began their job search in Chicago, they were entering a market where I held considerable influence over their professional futures. And they had no idea I existed in their new world. The first sign that my moment was approaching came through my Northwestern alumni network. Despite our different social circles during college, we were part of the same graduating class, which meant we received the same career services updates and alumni communications. The university's career placement reports showed that both Madison and Cassie were seeking positions in Chicago's corporate communications and marketing sectors, exactly the industries where my network was strongest and my recommendations carried the most weight. Madison, according to her LinkedIn profile, was looking for a position in corporate communications or public relations, preferably with a company that would allow her to leverage her creative talents and communication skills. Her resume, which I was able to access through mutual Northwestern connections, emphasized her sorority leadership experience and internships at her father's country club and her aunt's boutique marketing firm. Cassie was targeting marketing, coordination roles, with a focus on companies that valued relationship building and creative problem solving. Her background included retail experience at high-end stores where her family shopped and a summer internship at a nonprofit organization where her mother served on the board. Both resumes read exactly like what they were: the work histories of young women who had never had to compete for opportunities, never had to prove themselves in environments where their family connections couldn't protect them, never had to develop the kind of resilience that real adversity creates. They were about to enter a professional world where I was positioned to influence whether they succeeded or failed, and their qualifications were embarrassingly weak compared to the standards I had helped establish in Chicago's competitive job market. But I wasn't planning to destroy them through obvious sabotage or direct confrontation. That would have been crude, unprofessional, and potentially damaging to my own reputation. Instead, I was going to do something far more elegant and devastating. I was going to let them destroy themselves by giving them exactly what they thought they deserved. The plan began to crystallize when Jennifer Walsh approached me about a new client relationship that would give me the perfect opportunity to orchestrate Madison and Cassie's professional humiliation. Sterling Communications has asked us to help them rebuild their entire marketing department, Jennifer explained during our weekly strategy meeting. They're a prestigious firm, great reputation, excellent compensation packages. They want to hire for several positions at once: junior associates, marketing coordinators, communications specialists. Sterling Communications was one of Chicago's most respected firms, with clients that included major corporations and high-profile nonprofits. Working there was considered a significant career achievement, and the company was known for hiring only exceptional candidates who could handle demanding workloads and maintain the highest professional standards. They've specifically requested that you handle the candidate assessment process, Jennifer continued. They want your insights on cultural fit and long-term potential, not just technical qualifications. It was perfect. Sterling Communications was exactly the kind of prestigious company that Madison and Cassie would target for their job search. The positions they were advertising matched precisely with what both women were seeking, and I would be the primary gatekeeper determining which candidates made it through the interview process. I'd be happy to take the lead on this, I told Jennifer, maintaining the professional composure that had become second nature over the past 5 years. But inside, I was calculating the perfect revenge. I spent the next 2 weeks crafting a recruitment strategy that would ensure Madison and Cassie would not only apply to Sterling Communications, but would be convinced that they were perfect candidates for the positions available. Working through my Northwestern alumni network, I arranged for information about Sterling's job openings to be shared in exactly the channels where Madison and Cassie would see them. I made sure the position descriptions emphasized the kind of creative and relationship-focused responsibilities that would appeal to their self-perceived strengths. I even arranged for mutual acquaintances to mention casually that Sterling was known for valuing Northwestern graduates and that the hiring process was being managed by some consulting firm that really understands what the company is looking for. Both women applied within a week of the positions being posted publicly. Their cover letters and resumes arrived in my inbox on the same Tuesday morning, along with applications from 47 other candidates competing for Sterling's 5 open positions. Reading their applications was like traveling back in time to Roosevelt High School. The same entitled confidence, the same assumption that they deserved success based on their backgrounds rather than their achievements. the same complete lack of awareness about their own limitations. Madison's cover letter talked about her natural leadership abilities and innovative communication strategies without providing any concrete examples of either. Cassie's application emphasized her collaborative approach and creative vision, supported by references to group projects from college and volunteer work with organizations connected to her family. Neither application demonstrated the kind of analytical thinking, strategic insight, or professional achievement that Sterling Communications required. Both women had clearly assumed that their Northwestern degrees and family connections would be sufficient to earn them interviews at any company they targeted. They were about to learn how wrong they had been, but not immediately. The most elegant revenge required patience, precision, and the appearance of complete fairness. I scheduled both Madison and Cassie for first-round interviews, along with 8 other candidates whose qualifications were genuinely competitive. I wanted them to experience the full process, to believe they had a real chance at success, before reality was revealed in the most humiliating way possible.
The interviews were scheduled for the following week in Sterling Communications' downtown offices, with their senior management team conducting the sessions and me providing candidate assessments and recommendations. Madison and Cassie had no idea that their former victim would be sitting across the table from them, holding their professional futures in her hands. 5 years after prom night, the final act of my revenge was about to begin. The Sterling Communications building rose 43 floors above Chicago's Loop, its glass and steel facade reflecting the autumn morning sun as candidates for the marketing department positions arrived for their interviews. I had spent the weekend reviewing every application, preparing detailed assessments, and coordinating with Sterling's executive team to ensure the interview process would be both thorough and revealing. But most of my preparation had focused on 2 specific candidates who would be walking into conference room 2847 that morning, completely unaware that their former victim now held their professional futures in her hands. I arrived at Sterling's offices 2 hours before the first interview, using the time to arrange the conference room exactly as I wanted it. The table was positioned so that the candidates would sit with their backs to the floor-to-ceiling windows, while the interview panel, Sterling's senior management team, and myself, would have the commanding view of the city skyline. More importantly, I arranged my seat so that I would be directly across from wherever the candidates sat, ensuring that I would be the first person they saw clearly when they entered the room. Rebecca Sterling, the company's founder and CEO, arrived 30 minutes before the interviews were scheduled to begin. At 52, she had built her communications firm from a one-person operation to one of Chicago's most respected agencies. And she had specifically requested my involvement because she valued my ability to assess candidates beyond their resumes. "I've reviewed your preliminary evaluations," she said, settling into her chair with a cup of coffee and the stack of applications I had prepared. "You've identified some strong candidates for us." "Thank you. I think you'll find that the candidates we're seeing today represent different approaches to the kind of strategic thinking and cultural adaptation that Sterling Communications requires." Rebecca nodded, flipping through my assessments. "I notice you flagged a few candidates with concerns about expectation management and adaptability to merit-based environments. Can you elaborate on what that means?" I had crafted those phrases carefully, knowing they would prompt exactly this conversation. Some candidates have backgrounds that suggest they're accustomed to success being provided rather than earned. They may struggle in environments where advancement depends entirely on performance and results. And you can identify that from their applications? From their applications, their references, and their responses during the initial screening process. But the interview will confirm whether my assessment is accurate. Rebecca smiled with the sharp appreciation of someone who had built her own success through determination rather than inheritance. "I'm looking forward to seeing your evaluation process in action." The first interview was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Madison Hartwell. At exactly 8:58, there was a soft knock on the conference room door. Rebecca's assistant opened it to admit a young woman in a perfectly tailored navy blazer and pencil skirt, her blonde hair styled in professional waves, her smile radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having to doubt your own worth. Madison walked into the room with the same easy grace she had possessed in high school, scanning the interview panel with the expectant friendliness of someone who assumed she would be welcomed wherever she went. Her eyes moved from Rebecca to the marketing director to the senior account manager and finally landed on me. The recognition was immediate and devastating. I watched the confidence drain from her face as her brain struggled to process what she was seeing. The quiet girl from Roosevelt High School, the one she had humiliated at prom, sitting at the head of the table in an expensive suit with a leather portfolio, clearly positioned as the lead interviewer for her dream job. "Please, have a seat," I said calmly, gesturing to the chair across from me. "I'm Lyra Chen from Hamilton and Associates. We're handling the candidate assessment process for Sterling Communications." Madison's hand trembled slightly as she pulled out the chair, her professional composure cracking as she tried to understand how the girl she had destroyed 5 years ago was now in a position to determine her career prospects. "Madison Hartwell," she managed, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "Thank you for the opportunity to interview." Rebecca began with standard opening questions about Madison's background and interest in the position. Madison's answers were rehearsed and generic, hitting all the expected talking points about her passion for communications and her excitement about Sterling's client portfolio.
But I could see the panic building behind her professional facade. She kept glancing at me, clearly struggling to reconcile the powerful woman across the table with her memories of the invisible girl who had been her victim. "Madison," I said when Rebecca finished her initial questions, "I'd like to explore your approach to managing challenging interpersonal dynamics in professional settings. Can you tell us about a time when you had to work with someone you found difficult?" It was a perfectly standard interview question, but Madison's face went pale as she recognized the deeper implications. She was being asked to discuss conflict resolution by the same person she had once humiliated in front of 300 classmates. "Well," she began hesitantly, "I think the key to working with difficult people is trying to understand their perspective and find common ground." "That's an interesting approach," I replied, making notes in my portfolio. "Can you give us a specific example of a time when you successfully applied that strategy?" Madison fumbled through an answer about a group project in college, but her response was vague and unconvincing. She was clearly struggling to focus on the interview while processing the shock of our role reversal. Rebecca picked up the questioning, asking about Madison's experience with high-pressure deadlines and demanding clients. Madison's answers became increasingly generic and nervous, her carefully practiced interview persona crumbling under the weight of her psychological discomfort. "I'd like to discuss your approach to teamwork," I said during the second half of the interview. "Sterling Communications values collaborative environments where everyone's contributions are respected. How do you ensure that all team members feel valued and included?" The question hit its target perfectly. Madison's face flushed as she struggled to answer a question about inclusion and respect while sitting across from someone whose inclusion and respect she had once humiliated in front of 300 classmates. "Well," she began hesitantly, "I think the key to working with difficult people is treating everyone with kindness and professionalism." "That's admirable," I replied, maintaining perfect professional neutrality. "Can you describe a specific situation where you had to stand up for someone who was being treated unfairly?" Silence stretched across the conference room as Madison stared at me, clearly unable to fabricate an example of the kind of moral courage she had never demonstrated in her life. Her mouth opened and closed without producing words, and I could see beads of perspiration forming along her hairline despite the cool temperature of the air-conditioned office. Rebecca glanced between us, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. The other Sterling executive shifted uncomfortably as Madison's interview performance deteriorated in real time. "Take your time," I said gently, the same tone I might use with any struggling candidate. "It's important that we understand your values and how they align with Sterling's commitment to creating inclusive professional environments." Madison finally managed a weak response about supporting classmates during group projects, but her answer was hollow and unconvincing. She had spent so many years being the person others needed protection from that she couldn't credibly claim to be someone who provided that protection. The interview concluded 20 minutes later with Madison's confidence completely shattered. As she shook hands with the panel and gathered her materials, she avoided eye contact with me entirely, clearly desperate to escape the room where her professional aspirations had been quietly demolished. "Thank you for your time," she said to the panel generally, still not looking directly at me. "I hope to hear from you soon." After Madison left, Rebecca turned to me with raised eyebrows. That was interesting. She seemed extremely nervous, more than usual for these interviews. Some candidates struggle more than others when they encounter unexpected challenges. It can be revealing about how they might perform under pressure in actual work situations. Rebecca nodded, making her own notes. "What's your assessment?" "I think Madison's responses suggest someone who has been successful in structured environments where expectations are clearly defined and outcomes are predictable. She may struggle in Sterling's dynamic, results-oriented culture where adaptability and genuine collaboration are essential." It was a diplomatically devastating evaluation, delivered with the kind of professional objectivity that made it impossible to argue with, while ensuring Madison would never receive a job offer from Sterling Communications. The second interview was scheduled for 11 o'clock. Cassie Morrison. At 10:59, the conference room door opened again and Cassie walked in with the same entitled confidence that Madison had displayed before recognition set in. She wore an expensive burgundy dress with matching accessories, her auburn hair perfectly styled, her smile bright with the expectation of success.
And just like Madison, her expression transformed completely when she saw me sitting at the head of the table. "Good morning," I said warmly, rising to shake her hand. "I'm Lyra Chen from Hamilton and Associates. Please, have a seat." Cassie's hand was cold and slightly damp when she shook mine, and I could see the same psychological shock registering that Madison had experienced an hour earlier. The girl they had humiliated at prom was now the gatekeeper for their professional ambitions. But Cassie recovered more quickly than Madison had, her smile snapping back into place with determined professionalism. "Cassie Morrison," she said, settling into her chair with forced confidence. "I'm very excited about the opportunity to join Sterling Communications." Rebecca began with the same opening questions, and Cassie's initial responses were polished and enthusiastic. She had clearly prepared more thoroughly than Madison, with specific examples of projects she had worked on and detailed knowledge of Sterling's client portfolio. But I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes as she tried to determine the best strategy for handling this unexpected situation. Cassie had always been the more strategically minded of my two tormentors, and she was clearly trying to figure out how to turn our shared history to her advantage. "Cassie," I said when it was my turn to ask questions, "I'm interested in your approach to building professional relationships with colleagues who come from different backgrounds than your own. How do you connect with people who might have different perspectives or experiences?" It was another perfectly reasonable interview question that carried loaded implications given our history. "I think diversity of background and perspective is incredibly valuable in any organization," Cassie replied smoothly. "I've always tried to learn from people who see the world differently than I do." "Can you give us a specific example of a time when you learned something important from someone whose background was very different from yours?" Cassie's smile flickered for just a moment before she launched into a prepared answer about working with international students during a college group project. But her response was generic and superficial, clearly fabricated for the interview rather than drawn from genuine experience. "That's interesting," I said, making notes. "It sounds like you value intellectual diversity. How do you handle situations where someone challenges your assumptions or points out areas where you might need to grow?" This question cut deeper, and Cassie's professional mask slipped slightly as she recognized the personal implications. She had never been someone who accepted criticism gracefully or acknowledged her own limitations. "I think feedback is important for professional growth," she said carefully. "I try to stay open to constructive criticism." "Excellent," I replied. "Can you describe a situation where someone's feedback led you to change your behavior or approach to a problem?" Another impossible question for someone who had spent her life in environments where her behavior was rarely challenged and never had consequences. Cassie struggled through an answer about missing a deadline in college, but her response revealed someone who had never faced genuine accountability for her actions. As the interview progressed, I continued asking questions that seemed perfectly professional to Rebecca and the other Sterling executives, but that systematically exposed Cassie's lack of genuine self-awareness, empathy, and moral courage. When I asked about handling workplace conflicts, she couldn't provide examples of successful mediation or problem solving. When I inquired about supporting colleagues during challenging times, her answers were vague and hypothetical. When I explored her approach to ethical decision-making, she fell back on corporate platitudes that revealed no real understanding of moral complexity. Most devastatingly, when I asked about a time she had to apologize for a mistake or take responsibility for something that didn't go as planned, she initially claimed she couldn't think of any such situation. "Really?" I said with apparent surprise. "In your entire academic and professional experience, you've never had to acknowledge an error or take responsibility for something that didn't go as planned?" Rebecca and the other interviewers looked skeptical, clearly recognizing that someone who claimed never to have made mistakes was either lying or dangerously lacking in self-awareness. Cassie backtracked quickly, fabricating a story about missing a deadline in college, but her initial response had already revealed the same entitled mindset that had allowed her to participate in my humiliation without ever considering the need for accountability. The interview concluded with Cassie's confidence significantly damaged, though she maintained her professional composure better than Madison had. As she gathered her materials and prepared to leave, she looked directly at me for the first time since the interview began.
"Thank you, Lyra," she said, her use of my first name carrying undertones of familiarity that the other interviewers couldn't interpret. "I hope we'll have the chance to work together." The statement was clearly intended as some kind of peace offering or acknowledgement of our shared history, but it only served to highlight her continued failure to understand the power dynamics of our situation. After Cassie left, Rebecca turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Two candidates from Northwestern, both struggling more than I would expect from graduates of such a prestigious program." "Not all Northwestern graduates are created equal," I replied. "Some earn their success through merit and determination, while others coast on advantages they were born with. The difference becomes apparent when they face genuine challenges." Rebecca nodded slowly. "And your assessment of Ms. Morrison?" "Similar concerns to the previous candidate, but with additional issues around authenticity and self-awareness. Her responses suggest someone who has never had to develop genuine conflict resolution skills or take responsibility for negative outcomes. That could be problematic in Sterling's collaborative, accountability-focused environment." Another diplomatically devastating evaluation delivered with the same professional objectivity that made it unassailable. The remaining interviews that day proceeded smoothly, with genuinely qualified candidates who demonstrated the kind of analytical thinking, professional maturity, and cultural fit that Sterling Communications required. By 5 o'clock, I had conducted 8 interviews and identified 3 candidates who would be excellent additions to Sterling's team. Madison Hartwell and Cassie Morrison were not among them. As I packed my materials and prepared to leave Sterling's offices, Rebecca walked me to the elevator. Excellent work today, Lyra. Your assessment process is exactly what we needed. When can we expect your formal recommendations? I'll have the written evaluations to you by tomorrow morning, along with my recommendations for next steps with the top candidates. Perfect. And Lyra. Rebecca paused as the elevator doors opened. I'm impressed by how thoroughly you evaluate cultural fit alongside technical qualifications. It's clear you understand that skills can be taught, but character and work ethic are much harder to develop. Thank you, Rebecca. I believe in hiring people who will thrive in your specific environment, not just people who look good on paper. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, I reflected on the day's interviews. Madison and Cassie had walked into Sterling Communications expecting to charm their way into prestigious positions based on their degrees and family connections, just as they had charmed their way through high school based on popularity and privilege. Instead, they had encountered a process that valued merit over connections, substance over style, and genuine character over superficial charm. They had been evaluated by someone who understood exactly who they were beneath their professional facades, someone who could ask questions that exposed their fundamental lack of the qualities that real success requires. They had been given every opportunity to demonstrate growth, maturity, and professional competence. They had failed completely, not because I sabotaged them, but because they had never developed the skills and character traits that genuine success demands. The girl they had humiliated at prom had become someone whose recommendation could make or break careers throughout Chicago's business community. The victims of their cruelty had built something unshakable, while they remained exactly who they had always been, people who expected success to be given rather than earned. 5 years after prom night, justice had been served with surgical precision.